Hello and welcome to Bite My Pie. In this video we're going to look at how to safely access devices on your home network remotely across the internet. To do this we'll be using ZeroTier, which, as I'll demonstrate, uses an ingenious approach to simplify the process while at the same time keeping your connection secure. So if this sounds of interest to you, stick around. Before diving into the setup, let's take a quick look at how you'd traditionally allow remote access to a local network, and then see how ZeroTier differs in its approach. On a home network, all of your traffic goes through the router, including anything heading for the internet. This stream of data is broken up into small segments known as packets to make it easier to transport. But whereas the packets inside your home network are typically allowed to move around freely from device to device, those destined for the internet have to pass through your router's firewall. Outbound traffic, that is from your home network to the internet, is usually unrestricted or allowed, so you can surf the web and your search results bring back the information you've requested. However, traffic coming the other way, in other words anything originating from the internet and trying to access your home network, is usually blocked by default on most routers. This is a good thing, otherwise anyone out there on the World Wide Web would be able to gain entry into your local network, which would be disastrous. So the traditional way to allow remote access to your home network is to open a port in your firewall. This is like poking a hole through it to allow specific traffic in. For example, if you set up an OpenVPN server on your local network and open port 1194 in order to connect to it securely, you'd then be able to access your home network remotely. Likewise, opening up port 443 would allow you to create a HTTPS connection to an Apache web server if you happen to have one running internally. In the case of a web server, you may well want anyone on the internet to be able to access it. After all, what good is a website that no one can view? But for numerous reasons, I wouldn't recommend running a public website from your home network anyway, not least of which because your ISP may not allow it. And as with any open port, it could risk exposing your local network to the internet, particularly if the web server isn't kept up to date. Obviously, the more ports you open, the greater the security risk. Sure, you can and should implement security measures to prevent unauthorized access, but any time you open an inbound port on your router, you're potentially creating a weak spot into your network. Another issue when creating a remote connection in this way is that you need to know your public IP address. This is assigned by your internet service provider, and worse still, on a home network is usually dynamic, meaning it may not always be the same. Now there is a service known as Dynamic DNS that solves this problem by letting you set up a memorable domain name. This then resolves to your public IP address even if it changes. But as you can no doubt tell, the overall process of setting this up is a little involved. So let's take a look at how ZeroTier handles remote access, shall we? The basic concept is to put everything on the same network. So just as all of the devices in your home are on a single network and can therefore talk to each other, ZeroTier takes this to a whole new level by creating what to all intents and purposes is one local network that operates over the internet. So any device you join to this network can communicate with any other device that you add. How is this even possible? At least that's what I wondered when I first discovered this software. And is it secure? That was the second thought to run through my mind. To answer the first question, ZeroTier constructs a virtual network that you can add your devices to. To do this, when you install the software, it creates a virtual network adapter on the device. And as you add more devices, each of these virtual adapters is on the same network. This is possible because by creating a ZeroTier account, you actually configure the virtual network and control which devices are allowed to connect to it. With regards to the second question, you can be confident that your connection is secure as ZeroTier uses 256-bit end-to-end encryption. To quickly set out the process, first you create an account with ZeroTier. The free one should more than suffice for most home users. Second, you set up your virtual network. Third, install the ZeroTier software on each device that you'd like to connect. And fourth, allow the devices to join your virtual network. Now that's all well and good, but precisely how do your devices find one another to communicate in the first place? As an example, let's say I've set up a web server that I want to connect to from my smartphone, no matter where I am on the internet. The web server is running on my home network and I'm out at a friend's house having coffee. Suddenly I have a desperate need to connect to my web server. I've already added both devices to my virtual network. When I turn on the ZeroTier connection on my smartphone, it contacts ZeroTier's servers to establish a connection to that virtual network, and therefore my web server. Remember, this connection is encrypted from end to end, so even ZeroTier can't see the data passing through it. They'll just know the IP address where the connection came from and the IP address where it went to. Once the connection is established, ZeroTier will try to create an encrypted tunnel directly between the devices so that the traffic doesn't even need to be relayed through ZeroTier's servers. Most of the time this works fine and also results in a faster connection speed. But if for some reason this isn't possible, it's technically a process known as NAT traversal, then all of the data will continue to be relayed through ZeroTier's servers. If you don't like the sound of this, and since ZeroTier is open source, you could spin up your own relay servers. Apparently the process of how this works will be changing in ZeroTier 2.0 to make it both easier and completely decentralized. But if you'd like to read about how it works now, you can take a look at the manual on the project's website. Setting this up is beyond the scope of this tutorial. Hopefully, just from what we've seen already, you can start to appreciate the advantages of using ZeroTier. Best of all, you shouldn't even need to configure your firewall or manually open any ports. Okay, now that we know what ZeroTier is and the basics of how it works, let's dig in and start setting up this software-defined networking. Here I am on a Windows computer, but you can do this on any device with a web browser. And I'm going to open Google Chrome, but feel free to use your browser of choice. We're going to search for ZeroTier, and it's this website, zerotier.com. The first thing you need to do, assuming you don't have one already, is create an account. So click on the sign up button. If you pop in your name, your email address, and then create a password, from there click on register. ZeroTier will then send you a verification email that you'll need to click on to activate the account. Once you've done that, you'll be able to log in, and when you've done so, you'll be confronted by this screen. You can see it gives us some getting started instructions. So first then we need to create a network, and we can do that by clicking on this create a network button. Now let's configure that network by clicking on its ID. ZeroTier has given it a random name, so let's first call it something more meaningful. If I delete that, I'm going to go with byte my pi, all lowercase. Changes to the settings are saved automatically. You may have noticed when making a change the box turns orange, and when it goes green, then returns to blue, the change has been saved. You can enter a description for your virtual network if you'd like. By default, your ZeroTier network will be private. That means you have to authorize or allow devices to join it. Alternatively, you could make the network public, but unless you have a good reason for doing so, I wouldn't recommend this. Anyone who has your network ID can connect to a public network, but even if your network is private, it's still best not to disclose this information. Don't worry, I'll be deleting this network before I publish the video. Okay, if we scroll down the page to the advanced section, ZeroTier has set an IP range for our virtual network. Depending on what this is, you may wish to change it. If you're familiar with IP addressing, you've probably noticed that each of these IP ranges belongs to a special subset of IPv4 addresses that are private. Without getting bogged down in the intricacies of networking theory, these ranges are reserved for private networks and are not publicly routable over the internet. This highlights the fact that ZeroTier is creating a private virtual network. The clever part is that this is accessible over the internet, yet still behaves like a local network. If you'd like to manually configure this virtual network, you can click on the Advanced tab, or alternatively you can just select one of the other ranges. I'd suggest one of the 10 dot ranges, as that shouldn't conflict with your existing home network. I'd also go for one with the first 3 numbers, or octets as they're technically known, filled in. This will give you a virtual network with 256 IP addresses, and since ZeroTier's free account only allows for 100 devices to connect to it, is more than enough. Right, for this demonstration I'm going to go with 10.147.18, and you can see up here under Manage Routes that the LAN has now changed to that network. And easy as that, that's our ZeroTier virtual network configured. If you scroll back up to the top of the page, just make a note of your network ID. Okay, let's take a look at how to install the ZeroTier software on the devices we want to connect to our virtual network. In the last video we set up our own personal cloud service with Nextcloud. If you missed it and would like to see what that entails, I've put a link in the video description. Let's start then by adding the Nextcloud Ubuntu appliance to our ZeroTier virtual network. First we need to remotely access it, which on this Windows computer I can do from the command prompt. So log in using the SSH command, the username of your Ubuntu account and the IP address of your Nextcloud server. Remember, this must be done on a computer that has the SSH keys. Once connected, we need to install the ZeroTier software, and since Ubuntu appliances use snap packages, we're going to use this method to carry out the installation. So the command to enter is snap space install space ZeroTier -1. When you've typed that in, press the enter key. With the ZeroTier 1 snap package installed, let's run the following command to check its status, which is sudo, because it requires admin rights, space ZeroTier -1 dot ZeroTier again -CLI space info, and press enter. Now as you can see, it's already reading as being online, but it doesn't matter if yours isn't yet. Next we need to type the following command to enable the virtual network adapter on our Nextcloud server, and that is snap space connect space ZeroTier -1 network control, and then press enter. Now if you run the ZeroTier info command again, you can see if it's online. Don't worry, you don't have to type it all in again. If you press the up arrow key on your keyboard twice, it'll bring the command back, and then you can press the enter key once more. And hopefully, even if it wasn't before, your ZeroTier connection should now be showing online. Make a note of the virtual network adapter's ID, as we're going to need it a little later. Remember earlier when I asked you to jot down that network ID from your ZeroTier account? Well, we're going to need it now for the next command, which is sudo space ZeroTier -1 dot ZeroTier -CLI space join space and then your network ID, which in my case is 0CCC B752 F73 F187F. It's worth double checking that you've typed it in correctly. This command is going to join the Nextcloud Ubuntu appliance's virtual network adapter to our ZeroTier private network. So let's press enter to do just that. Now if you're following along, remember that we set up a private virtual network. So even though we can see that it's joined OK, the connection won't actually work until we authorize it in our ZeroTier account. So let's open up a web browser, return to ZeroTier.com and log in to do precisely that. Once logged in, click on your network ID, scroll down the page to where it says members. We can clearly see that a device has joined the network. Be aware it can take around 30 seconds to a minute before a new device shows up in your ZeroTier account's control panel. If you look underneath address, you should see the virtual network adapter's ID that we made a note of before. So just check that this is the same. And then to join the Nextcloud server to our ZeroTier network, all that we need to do is tick this little box underneath authorization. And simple as that, we should have a connection. It's a good idea to give it a name to help identify the device on your network. So I'll just call this Nextcloud. And optionally you can enter a description. ZeroTier will issue an IP address to each device that connects to the network using the IP range we specified earlier. You can see here underneath managed IPs that my Nextcloud server has been given the IP address 10.147.18.63. Now that's fine because that address is tied to that device, so we can access it through it. But let's say that I want to change it to something that's just a little bit easier to remember. To do that, I can enter the new address next to the plus below. Obviously it still needs to be part of the same network range, so I'm going to go with 10.147.18.50 and then click on the plus sign. Since I don't want the original address anymore, I'm going to delete it by clicking on the trash can. It may take a little while for your device to reconnect to the network, but you'll know it's done so when the physical IP changes from unknown back to your device's public IP address. And that's it. Now my Nextcloud server is accessible on the IP address that I've just set. If the device you've just added is one that you want to connect to, like the Nextcloud server, jot down its IP address as you'll need it later. So let's minimize the web browser and return to the command prompt where I'm still remotely logged in to my Nextcloud Ubuntu appliance. And there's a couple of things we can do here to check our new network. So we can enter the command sudo space ZeroTier -1 dot ZeroTier -CLI space list networks and press enter. And among other things, this shows us our network ID, the name that we gave to the ZeroTier network, mine was Bite My Pie, and the IP address we just set in our ZeroTier control panel. Finally, if we run the command IP space A, this shows us the computer's network interfaces. My Nextcloud server is connected to the router by an Ethernet cable and has the IP address 192.168.0.10. But more importantly, we can see that it's now got this virtual network adapter and the ZeroTier IP address of 10.147.18.50 that I manually set. Great, so we've now added our first device, but a single device isn't much use on a network, so let's go add another. So here we are on a different Windows PC, and we're going to add this to our ZeroTier network. If I open the command prompt and type the command ipconfig and press enter, we can see that this computer is on the 192.168.10 network. My Nextcloud server is on the 192.168.0 network. So at the moment there's no way these two machines should be able to communicate with each other. Let's verify this by running a ping command. I'm going to enter the IP address of my Nextcloud Ubuntu appliance, and if I press enter, sure enough there's no reply. Okay, let's fix this by installing ZeroTier in Windows. First we're going to open the web browser and we're going to head back to ZeroTier.com. From the home page, click on download. You can see the various platforms that ZeroTier is available for. As I'm on a Windows machine, I'm going to click on Windows and then save the program. When it's finished downloading, you can close your web browser and let's go find it in our downloads directory. It's the usual type of Windows installation wizard if we double click the program to run it. Let's close File Explorer and then click on Install. Say yes to make Windows happy. And when it's completed the installation, you can click Finish to launch the software and then click Yes again. Now if we look down in the taskbar, we can see that we've gained a ZeroTier icon, and clicking on it shows us the context menu. It's worth making a note of the node ID. Since that's been issued to this device, we can use it to authenticate the Windows PC before authorizing it to join our ZeroTier network. Speaking of which, let's begin that process now. So click on Join Network. You need to click in the box and enter your ZeroTier network ID. So mine is 0CCC B752 F73 F187F. You want to make sure that Allow Managed is ticked, as this allows it to obtain its settings from those we configured in the ZeroTier control panel. And unless you have a special use case, you can leave Allow Global and Allow Default unticked, then click on Join. As we want the virtual network adapter to function correctly on our ZeroTier network, click on Yes. Right, now we need to log back into our ZeroTier control panel to authorize this Windows computer. So in your web browser, head over to ZeroTier.com log back into your account, click on your network ID, and if you scroll down the page to the members section again, we can see that I've now got a second device trying to join my network. If it's not there, just wait a moment for it to appear. I can tell this is my Windows computer because it's the same node ID I made a note of a moment ago. So when you're happy for it to connect to your network, tick the Authorize box. And a few seconds later we can see that it's being given an IP address on my 10.147.18 network. I'm going to give it the name WinPC-more-pi, and I'm also going to change its IP address to 10.147.18.75 and click the plus, and then I'm going to remove the original IP address. I'm also going to jot down the new IP address, as I'll be showing you how to remotely connect to it a little later. But for now, if we scroll back up the page, I'm going to log out of my account and close the browser. Right, let's first check that our new settings have taken effect. So if we open up the command prompt again and retype ipconfig and press enter, all being well, you should now be seeing at least 2 network adapters. So here I've got the Windows computer's Ethernet adapter, and now I've also got a ZeroTier virtual adapter. And as you can see, the virtual adapter has the IP address that I just set of 10.147.18.75. If you remember earlier when I added my Nextcloud server to the ZeroTier network, I gave that the IP address 10.147.18.50. So now that both of those devices appear to be on the same virtual network, here comes the moment of truth. If I clear the screen with a CLS, I'm going to try pinging my Nextcloud server. So let's pop in its IP address. Then fingers crossed, press enter. And just like that we have connectivity. Now that's great, but to be of any real use we need to do something with the connection. So let's see if I can access my Nextcloud server through it. And this time I'm going to put its virtual IP address into my web browser. And while that's not quite the result we'd like to see, it's a good start because it means we can reach Nextcloud's web server. What's actually happened is a security feature of Nextcloud. It doesn't like the fact that we're trying to access it through this IP address which it doesn't recognise. But fret not, because we can soon remedy that. To do that we need to return to a computer that can remotely access the Nextcloud Ubuntu server. So I'm no longer on the more-pi Windows computer, I'm back on the ByteMyPi Windows PC. And to help differentiate the two moving forward, I've put their names on the respective desktops. So I'm going to open the command prompt and remote back into the Nextcloud server. What we're actually going to do then is add the ZeroTier IP address for the Nextcloud server to Nextcloud's trusted list. Because in the Ubuntu appliance version Nextcloud is running as a snap package, the process is slightly different, but don't worry, it's pretty straightforward. First we want to find the IP addresses or domain names that Nextcloud currently allows. We can do this by typing the command sudo space snap space run space nextcloud.occ space config system get space trusted _domains space 0. Nextcloud stores its trusted domains and IP addresses in slots. Entering this command will show us the information in slot 0, and here we can see the local IP address of my Nextcloud server. So rather than entering that command again, press the up arrow on your keyboard, and this time delete the 0 on the end and enter 1 instead. Since that's returned no result, it means that slot 1 is empty. You need to find your first available slot, and then we're going to enter the following command: sudo space snap space run space nextcloud.occ space config system set space trusted underscore domains space, and then the number of your first empty slot, which in my case is 1, space dash dash value equals, and then ZeroTier's IP address for the Nextcloud server, which for me is 10.147.18.50. So let's press enter to input that, and it gives us a confirmation that it's added the IP address to the trusted domains. It's worth restarting the Nextcloud server to make sure that the change takes effect, and we can do that with sudo reboot. Give it a minute to start back up, and then we'll go and try again. So I'm back on the second Windows PC named morepi. Just to show that in the command prompt, you can see that the virtual network adapter has that IP address of 10.147.18.75. And if I reopen the web browser, let's try the Nextcloud server's ZeroTier address again, which is 10.147.18.50. And just like that, we have our Nextcloud login screen. Obviously, you could also install the Windows Nextcloud app and use the ZeroTier IP address to connect remotely through that as well. Naturally, the ZeroTier virtual adapter has to be enabled for the connection to work, but this should happen automatically. Also, if you don't see the ZeroTier icon in your taskbar, you can easily restore it by clicking on the ZeroTier program in the Start menu. Let's have another quick look at the context menu now that we're connected. So here we can see that I'm joined to the ByteMyPi virtual network, and if I click on Show Networks, we get more detailed information about the connection. Lastly, you may have noticed that the browser is still telling us that the connection to the Nextcloud server is unencrypted. While that's partially true, in as much as the data is passing around our virtual network on a plain HTTP connection, remember that the entire ZeroTier network is encrypted from end to end. So anything routed through it, for me that's any device connected to the 10.147.18 network, is securely traversing the internet inside a 256-bit encrypted tunnel. Of course, there's nothing to stop you running a HTTPS connection inside your ZeroTier network, effectively giving you 2 layers of encryption. That might be considered overkill, but to each their own, and it would certainly take more configuration. Okay, 2 devices connected. Let's add another. For the third connection, I'm going to set up a remote desktop session from one Windows computer to another. Usually I'd advise against using RDP or the remote desktop protocol over the internet, as it's not the best from a security point of view. But since we'll be using it inside our encrypted virtual network, that won't be an issue. As you can see, I'm still on the morepi Windows PC, as this is the computer I'll be remoting into. It currently has a local IP address of 192.168.10.11. but it also has the ZeroTier IP address that I set of 10.147.18.75. To allow the computer to be controlled remotely, we need to turn on Remote Desktop. So from the Start menu, let's open Settings. From there we need to head to System, and then click on Remote Desktop. All we need to do is toggle on the slider, and then click on Confirm. Remember, I've already added this PC to my ZeroTier network, so now it's ready to go. This is the Windows computer I'm going to use to remote into the morepi PC. In order to do that, I need to first join this to my ZeroTier network, as these 2 Windows machines are on different networks. We've already covered how to add a Windows computer to ZeroTier, so rather than go through that again, let's skip ahead. If we take a quick look in my ZeroTier account, you can see that I've authorized the ByteMyPi Windows PC to join my virtual network. I've also given it an identifiable name. ZeroTier has issued it with the IP address of 10.147.18.26. Because I don't want to access this PC, I'm just using it to access another device. I haven't changed this address as I don't need to remember it. Okay, if we look now at the ByteMyPi PC's network adapters, you can see that its physical NIC has the IP address of 192.168.0.50, So this cannot connect to the MorePi Windows PC, which if you recall has the IP address 192.168.10.11. But if we look at its ZeroTier virtual adapter with its 10.147.18.26 address, this should certainly be able to connect to the MorePi PC's corresponding virtual adapter at 10.147.18.75. So let's test that now. If we click in the search box and type remote, we can then select remote desktop connection. First I'm going to try and connect to the MorePi Windows PC by entering its local IP address, which is 192.168.10.11, and click connect. Unsurprisingly, as it's on a different network, the connection failed. Now let's enter MorePi's virtual IP address. So that's 10.147.18.75. And once again click connect. Straight away we get a login prompt. I need to enter my username and password for the MorePi computer. So that's MorePi, and pop in my password. And let's see if we can connect by clicking on OK. And this is a good sign because it's what you'd usually expect to see when initiating a Windows remote desktop connection. Note that the name in the certificate from the remote computer is MorePi PC. If you haven't specifically called your computer anything, you may get a more random name. And I need to select yes to continue connecting. Marvellous! Here I am remotely logged into the MorePi PC from the Byte My Pi computer. You can tell that it's a remote connection from the little bar at the top of the screen. Once connected, I can basically do anything on the remote computer as if I was sitting in front of it. Be aware that when accessing it over the internet, the response may be a little slower than you're used to. I can move between the two computers by clicking on the minimize button in the top bar, and then clicking on the remote desktop connection in the taskbar. And then when I've finished working on the remote PC, I can either sign out of it, or just click on the cross in the top bar to close the connection, and then confirm that you want to disconnect. At the risk of stating the obvious, hopefully it goes without saying that in order to access any computer remotely, you first need to ensure that that PC is powered on. And that's how you connect to a Windows computer remotely. For my fourth connection, I'm going to look at mobile, and I'm going to go through how we can connect from Android to our ZeroTier network. If you'd prefer to go the Apple route, you can just as easily do this on iOS. So here I am on the Android home screen, and the first thing we're going to do is go grab the ZeroTier app. So let's open the Play Store and search for ZeroTier, and I'm going to install the app. With that done, let's return to the home screen. Hopefully you've got an icon. If not, take a peek inside your app drawer. Right, let's open ZeroTier, and we want to add a network. You need to enter your network ID, which for me is 0CCC B752 F73 F187F. You have the option of routing all traffic through ZeroTier, but as I only want to use this to connect to other devices on my ZeroTier network, that's not necessary. And you also have the option to use custom DNS servers. Again, I'm going to stick with the default, and then click on Add Network. Okay, so the network's added, but before we enable it, let's first click on Settings. Since most Android devices are mobile, if you're planning on using this connection while you're out and about, you'll most likely want to turn on Use Cellular Data. If you have a fairly limited data allowance, don't worry about it using all your data, as you can turn the ZeroTier connection on and off as needed. But if you only want to use it on Wi-Fi, don't tick this box. I'm going to leave IPv6 turned on, as it should help when initially establishing the connection. And when you've selected your preferences, tap the back button. To turn on the ZeroTier network adapter, you need to toggle the slider. And we get a connection request message, so click OK to accept it. After a short while, your connection will change to online. Make a note of the ID, as just like any other device, Android is no different, and we need to authorize it to join the virtual network. Next then, we need to log into our ZeroTier account, You could do this through the web browser on your smartphone or tablet, but I'm going to return to the ByteMyPie PC to do so. Hopefully this is starting to become a familiar exercise as we open a web browser and return to ZeroTier.com. And after you've logged back in, click once again on your network ID, then scroll down the page to the members section, and we can see that my fourth connection has appeared. Checking the address column, I can see that it's the same ID I noted in Android, confirming that it belongs to me and it's not some random stranger trying to join my network. So I can tick on the little box to authorize the connection. As I only want to connect to other computers from Android and not remote into the Android device itself, I'm perfectly happy with the IP address that has been automatically assigned to it. So that's it, I can log out of my ZeroTier account. Back on Android, the network name has now appeared, confirming I'm connected to my ByteMyPie virtual network. You can also see that at the top of the screen we have this little key letting us know that the ZeroTier connection is active. So to disable or enable ZeroTier's virtual adapter, simply toggle the slider either off or on. Just remember to turn it on before trying to connect to another device on your virtual network. And even if you leave it on all the time, you'll still have to turn it back on following a restart of Android. Okay, if we return to the home screen, let's try remotely accessing another device on my virtual network. As luck would have it, I have the Nextcloud app here on my home screen. This was previously connected locally to my Nextcloud server, but as it's no longer on that network, you can see it can't currently connect. So let's fix that by going to my Nextcloud account icon and selecting Manage Account. I'm going to access the three dots context menu and temporarily remove my Nextcloud account. Don't worry about the scary message. Yes, it will delete the local files, but since Nextcloud stores these on the server and synchronizes with it, we'll get them back when we reconnect. So select OK to proceed. Then if we exit out of the Accounts section, now we can log in through ZeroTier by entering the Nextcloud server's virtual IP address, which in my case is http://10.147.18.50, and then enter this by either pressing the enter key on your keyboard or tapping this arrow on your touch screen. From here we can log in. Then it's just a case of entering your Nextcloud account username and password and logging in. Lastly, you just need to grant Android access to your Nextcloud account. Once connected, your files will start being downloaded from the server as the Nextcloud app synchronizes your account with it. And that's how we connect Android to Nextcloud through the ZeroTier network, thereby making your Nextcloud server accessible on your smartphone or tablet wherever you have an internet connection. For my fifth and final connection, I'm going to look at joining a Linux desktop PC to my ZeroTier virtual network. I'll be using the Ubuntu 20.04 LTS or long-term support desktop operating system, but the steps should be similar whatever distro you're running. Okay, here we are on the Ubuntu desktop, and the first thing we need to do is open a web browser. You guessed it, we're going to head to ZeroTier.com. and then click on the download link and then select Linux. We're going to use the second command to install ZeroTier as it's more secure. Let's move the browser to one side of the screen. So click the top bar and hold down the mouse button as you drag it across. Then when the bounding box appears, let go. Next we need to open the terminal. Click on Show Applications and start typing terminal. When the application appears, click on it, and let's resize this to fill the other half of the screen. It's also worthwhile right-clicking on the terminal icon and adding it to favourites to keep it pinned in the dock. Now I could install ZeroTier using its snap package, just as I did earlier on the Nextcloud Ubuntu appliance, especially since snaps are natively supported in Ubuntu. But as this isn't the case in every Linux distribution, let's continue with the installation method given on ZeroTier's website. This has a couple of requisites. In particular, we need both GPG and curl to carry out the installation. While Ubuntu already has GPG installed by default, unfortunately this isn't the case with curl. So let's install that first. Now before installing any package, it's always a good idea to make sure that the operating system is up to date, and we can do that with the following two commands: sudo apt update. After entering a command, press enter to execute it, and if the command begins with sudo, you'll probably need to enter your password as well. So that's the first command, and the second one is sudo apt upgrade. So my computer was already up to date. If yours finds any available packages, simply type Y for yes on the keyboard and press enter to install them. Okay, now that we're up to date, let's install curl. And that's as easy as typing sudo apt install curl. Great, we're ready to install ZeroTier. Now the reason I set up my windows side by side like this is it's much easier to copy and paste the text. You're also far less likely to make a mistake than typing such a long command. So click and drag to highlight all of the text, then right click on it and choose copy, then right click in the terminal and choose paste. And with that done, we can press enter. And there we have it, success. It's helpfully given us this device's ZeroTier address, which we'll need to confirm in our ZeroTier account before authorizing it. So jot that down and let's go do that now. Since we've already got the web browser open, let's go to my.zerotier.com and press enter, and we can log into our account. As usual, once logged in, click on your network ID, then scroll down the page to the members section. As you can see, at the moment I only have the 4 members. It also appears that I forgot to name the last one, so let's do that now. Now the reason the Ubuntu computer hasn't yet revealed itself is because I still need to join it to the virtual network, and I can do that back in the Linux terminal by entering the command sudo space ZeroTier -CLI space join space. Then I need to pop in my network ID, which is 0CCC B752 F73 F187F, and then press enter. If prompted, pop in your password. And now we have a join OK message, and if I look across at my ZeroTier account, I can see that it's now showing up in my members section, and also the address checks out to the one that I noted down a few moments ago. So I'm going to tick the box to authorize my Ubuntu computer, and now its virtual network adapter has an IP address. Right, so let's name it Ubuntu, and then I can log out of my ZeroTier account. Just before we test the connection, I'd like to show you a couple of useful commands. So they both need to be run as the super user or root, and so start with sudo, and they both use the main command ZeroTier-CLI, but the first one ends with info. This is a good one to remember in case you need to display a device's ZeroTier node ID or address. And then the second command ends in list networks. And as you might expect, this one gives us useful information about our ZeroTier virtual network, including the network ID, the name of the network, and the IP address of the device's virtual network adapter. Okay, enough technical jargon, let's see if it actually works. I'm going to close the terminal and maximize the web browser. Let's first try accessing my Nextcloud server, so that's on 10.147.18.50. Splendid, now let's try something a little bit different. I'm going to once again remotely access the MorePi Windows PC that I set up earlier, but this time from Linux. If you recall, I previously connected to it from another Windows machine, as it's a Windows remote desktop connection. But such trivialities should not deter us, as there's an app that will allow for precisely this type of shenanigans. And better yet, it's pre-installed on Ubuntu. So if we return to Show Applications and start typing Remina and click on the app when it appears. As it tells us, Remina is a remote desktop client, and even though it's a Linux application, Among other things, it supports Microsoft's Remote Desktop protocol, so make sure that RDP is selected and then enter the virtual network adapter's IP address of the Windows computer that you want to remotely access. For me, that's 10.147.18.75. If you're going to be connecting to the remote computer on a regular basis, you could click on the New Connection Profile button, but for now I'm just going to go with the Quick Connect option and press Enter to start the connection. I can see from the certificate that it's the MorePi PC. Your computer may have a more generic name, something like Lenovo or Dell. So we just need to click Yes to accept the certificate and start the connection. Then you need to enter the username and the password of the computer that you're trying to connect to and click on OK to log in. As the remote screen's a bit small, let's maximise the window, and then to fill the available space I'm going to click on the Toggle Dynamic Resolution Update button. You can even go full screen if you wish. So this is quite similar to Windows' own remote desktop client. In fact, if you hover over the top bar, you can even pin it into position so that it stays there. You've probably noticed that the desktop wallpaper isn't showing. This is because by default Remina will set pretty low resolution settings to help speed up the remote connection. If this bothers you and your connection speed is fast enough to cope, you can disconnect from the current session and then manually enter some parameters. There's quite a lot of granular control in here, but you don't need to enter everything. If I was going to save the connection, I'd give it a more meaningful name. Make sure that the protocol is set to RDP. In the server box you want to enter the remote computer's IP address. You can enter the remote machine's username and password to save typing them in later. You can even set the initial resolution size of the remote connection. If it's not already, set the colour depth to GFX 32 bits per pixel, and then flick over to the Advanced tab. Here we have arguably what is the most important setting, so if you'd like a good quality image at the expense of all else, set this to best slowest, and then you could save these settings, save and connect, or as I'm going to do, just click connect. And even in the small window now we can see the remote computer's wallpaper, so let's make it bigger again. And now we have Microsoft Windows in all its full colour glory. As with when we did this from a Windows computer, we can minimise the remote connection to move between the two computers, or click on Remina's shortcut in the dock, then select the remote PC to return to it. Then when you've finished with your remote session, you can either disconnect from it, as we did a moment ago, or you could even shut the remote computer down. And that's how to securely connect from Ubuntu to Windows using the remote desktop protocol over your ZeroTier network. Before we finish, let's quickly discuss removing devices from ZeroTier. I've logged back into my account control panel and I'm back in the members section. If I just want to temporarily remove a device from my virtual network, I can deauthorize it. So let's say I want to disconnect the ByteMyPi Windows PC. All I need to do is deselect the tick next to it. This way, if I later want to reconnect it, I just need to tick the authorization box again. But let's say I want to permanently remove a device. This is where the trash can on the far right comes in. If I click on that, I can then permanently delete the computer. This could be useful if, for example, you're selling it. Be aware that if you did delete a device and then needed to re-add it before ZeroTier's database had purged the record, you would have to do so manually. So when you're sure that you want it gone, click on delete. With regards to the ZeroTier software installed on a device that you've removed, you should be able to uninstall this in the usual fashion for that particular operating system. And that's almost it for this video. I hope you now have a better understanding of what ZeroTier is and how it can benefit you. Once you begin to get familiar with ZeroTier's control panel in the web interface and setup process on each device, you'll start to see how easy it is to expand your virtual network. While I didn't mention it in the main part of this video, as it's best not to overcomplicate things at first, once you become familiar with ZeroTier, you don't have to stick with a single network. That's right, you can actually set up multiple virtual networks. Several may be overkill, but it could be useful to have a couple if you have particular devices that you only want to be able to access certain other devices. So go turn the internet into your own secure and private LAN or local area network. That brings us to the end of this video. As always, if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to be notified when I post the next one, just click the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.